The transport ship Meridian's Hope drifted silently through the asteroid field, its hull scarred by decades of hauling refugees across the galaxy's forgotten corners. Captain Elena Vasquez pressed her weathered palm against the cold viewport, watching the distant stars that had once welcomed humanity with open arms. Those days were gone now, buried beneath 3 centuries of galactic politics and selective memory. "Captain, we're receiving another distress signal," called out Navigator Chen from his station. His young face carried the weight of someone who had seen too much too early. "It's coming from the Kepler mining station. They're under attack by Zephyrian raiders." Elena's jaw tightened. The Zephyrians were one of the Galactic Council's member species, blue-skinned traders known for their ruthless business practices. Officially, they were respected diplomats. Unofficially, they ran protection rackets on the outer rim worlds where Council oversight was thin. "How many ships?" Elena asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. 3 heavy cruisers. The mining station doesn't stand a chance. They're requesting immediate assistance from any Council vessel in the area. Elena laughed bitterly. The Meridian's Hope hadn't been registered as a Council vessel in over 50 years. After the Treaty of Forgotten Worlds, humanity had been quietly removed from most galactic databases. They existed in the spaces between official recognition, carrying supplies to colonies that other species had written off as too dangerous or unprofitable. "Captain, what are your orders?" Chen's voice carried a note of hope that Elena recognized. He was still young enough to believe in heroes. Elena studied the tactical display. The mining station housed nearly 3,000 beings, mostly Takari families who had fled their homeworld after its atmosphere had been poisoned by industrial accidents. They were refugees just like the humans aboard her ship. The Zephyrians would strip the station of everything valuable and leave the inhabitants to die in the cold vacuum of space. "We're not a warship. Chen, we're a cargo hauler with minimal weapons and a crew of 37. But Captain, those people will die if we try to help them," Elena finished. She turned away from the viewport, her reflection ghostly in the reinforced glass. The galaxy has made it very clear what they think of human intervention. Remember the Sigma Draconis incident? We saved an entire world from plague, and the Council accused us of biological warfare, or the defense of New Geneva. We held off an invasion fleet for 6 months, and they called it an unprovoked act of aggression. Chen's shoulders slumped. He had heard these stories countless times during their long journeys between forgotten worlds. Stories of human mercy met with suspicion, human heroism twisted into acts of villainy by politicians and media who found it convenient to have a scapegoat. The Takari helped us during the evacuation of Earth Colony 7. Navigation Officer Torres spoke up from her station. She was older than Chen, old enough to remember when humans had allies among the stars. "My sister's family was on that transport. The Takari captain risked his ship to get them out when the solar flares hit." Elena felt the familiar weight of command pressing down on her shoulders. Every decision carried the lives of her crew, and beyond that, the reputation of what remained of humanity's presence in this galaxy. They had learned to keep their heads down, to avoid drawing attention, to survive in the shadows of space. "Captain," came a new voice from the communications station. "I'm picking up children's voices on the emergency frequency. There are families on that station." Elena closed her eyes and saw the faces of her own crew. Chen, barely 25, who had never known Earth but carried its memory in his DNA. Torres, whose family had been saved by the kindness of strangers. Martinez in engineering, whose daughter was the same age as the voices they were hearing over the radio. She opened her eyes and looked at the tactical display again. 3 Zephyrian cruisers, each one outgunning her ship by a factor of 10. It was suicide to engage them. It was the smart choice to continue on their planned route to the outer haven colonies, where desperate settlements waited for the medical supplies in their cargo hold. But Elena Vasquez had not survived 3 decades of commanding refugee ships by making smart choices. She had survived by making necessary ones. "Martinez, I need everything you can give me from the engines," she called over the ship's intercom. Torres, plot a course that brings us in from the asteroid field's shadow. Chen, send a message to the station. Tell them help is coming. "Captain, are you sure about this?" Chen asked, his fingers hovering over the communications panel. Elena walked to the captain's chair and settled into the worn leather that had molded to her body over the years. She had inherited this ship from her father, who had inherited it from his mother. who had been there when humanity first reached for the stars with hope in their hearts and dreams of a better tomorrow. The galaxy has forgotten what we're capable of when they threaten innocent people, Elena said, her voice carrying to every corner of the bridge. They remember our wars, our mistakes, our failures. They've forgotten our mercy, our sacrifice, our willingness to stand between the darkness and those who cannot protect themselves. She activated the ship's general address system, speaking to her crew scattered throughout the vessel. This is your captain. We are about to engage 3 enemy vessels in defense of a civilian station. I won't lie to you about our chances. We're outgunned, outnumbered, and operating outside any legal protection. If any of you wish to record final messages to loved ones, now would be the time. The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's systems. Elena waited, knowing that she was asking her crew to risk everything for people they had never met, for a cause that their own government had long since abandoned. One by one, her officers looked up from their stations. Chen straightened in his chair, his young face set with determination. Torres checked her navigation calculations with practiced precision. Even Martinez's voice crackled over the intercom with something that might have been eager anticipation. All stations report ready, Captain, Chen announced. Elena smiled for the first time in weeks. The galaxy had indeed forgotten human mercy. But they were about to be reminded of what came after someone made that mistake. The Meridian's hope emerged from the asteroid field like a ghost materializing from the void. Elena watched the tactical display as the 3 Zephyrian cruisers continued their assault on the mining station. Bright flashes of energy weapons lit up the darkness as the station's minimal defenses crumbled under the sustained attack. They're not even trying to negotiate, Torres observed, her voice tight with anger. They're just pounding the station into scrap metal. Elena studied the enemy formation. The Zephyrians had positioned themselves in a standard pirate configuration, with 2 ships flanking the station, while the third hung back to intercept any rescue attempts. It was textbook raiding tactics designed to maximize terror and minimize their own losses. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, Chen reported, demanding the station's mining records and all refined minerals. They're giving the inhabitants 30 minutes to evacuate before they blow the life support systems. 30 minutes, Elena repeated. She knew it would take at least 2 hours to evacuate 3,000 people, assuming they had enough escape pods. The Zephyrians knew this too. They were offering false hope to make their victims more compliant. Captain, incoming transmission from the lead cruiser, Chen announced. They're hailing us directly. Elena wasn't surprised. Her ship's approach had been detected, and the Zephyrians would want to know if they were dealing with a potential threat or just another scared civilian vessel. Put them through, Elena ordered. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the angular features of a Zephyrian captain. His blue skin was marked with the ritual scars that denoted high rank in their merchant marine, and his golden eyes held the cold calculation of someone who viewed other beings as inventory to be processed. Unknown vessel. This is Captain Vectar of the Prophet's Edge. You have entered a restricted military operation. Alter your course immediately, or you will be considered hostile. Elena stood slowly, making sure her worn uniform and human features were clearly visible on the return transmission. She watched as Vectar's expression shifted from annoyance to surprise to what might have been amusement. A human ship, Vectar said, his translator rendering his words with mechanical precision. How quaint. I thought your species had finally learned to mind its own business after the Council's recent rulings. The Council doesn't speak for all of humanity, Elena replied evenly. And we don't abandon innocent people to pirates regardless of what our politicians might say. Vectar's laugh was a harsh, grating sound. Pirates. We are conducting a legitimate debt collection operation. The Takari miners owe substantial fees for protection services in this sector. We are simply ensuring payment. By threatening to murder 3,000 civilians? By conducting business in the traditional Zephyrian manner. But I am curious about something, human. Your ship appears to be a civilian cargo hauler. Do you perhaps carry valuable goods that might satisfy the miners' debt? Elena felt her crew's eyes on her. She could offer their cargo hold full of medical supplies to buy the miners time to escape. It would mean condemning the colonies waiting for those medications, but it might save the 3,000 lives on the station. I carry medical supplies bound for the Outer Haven colonies, Elena said carefully. Antibiotics, surgical equipment, blood plasma synthesizers. Vectar's golden eyes gleamed with interest. Medical supplies were always valuable on the black market. especially in the lawless regions where they operated. Interesting. Perhaps we can reach an arrangement. Transfer your cargo to our ships and we will consider the miners' debt partially satisfied. They will have time to arrange payment for the remainder. Elena knew it was a lie. The Zephyrians would take her cargo and then proceed with their original plan anyway, but she needed time to get closer to the enemy formation. I'll need to consult with my crew, Elena said, and verify the miners' consent to this arrangement. You have 10 minutes, Vector replied. After that, we will assume you are interfering with legal commerce and respond accordingly. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Elena looked at her crew, seeing the same calculation in their eyes that she was running in her head. The Meridian's hope was never designed for combat, but decades of operating in dangerous space had led to certain modifications that didn't appear in any official records. Martinez, how are those engine modifications holding up? Elena asked. The chief engineer's voice crackled over the intercom. The gravity manipulation coils are stable, Captain. We can probably manage one good acceleration burst before they overheat. Elena nodded. The gravity coils had been salvaged from a derelict warship and installed by a grateful station engineer, whose daughter they had evacuated from a plague world. Technically illegal under about 12 different council regulations, but incredibly useful for emergency maneuvers. Weapon status? She asked. We've got the mining laser charged and the 2 defensive pulse cannons online, reported Torres. Also, Cargo Bay 3 still has those modified mining charges from the Hellion operation. Elena smiled grimly. The mining charges were another gift from people they had helped, modified with proximity fuses and programmed to detonate near enemy vessels. Not exactly military-grade weapons, but effective enough against unshielded targets. Captain, Chen interrupted. I'm receiving multiple transmissions from the mining station. The Takari are begging us not to sacrifice ourselves for them. They're saying they can't bear the responsibility for our deaths. Elena closed her eyes, remembering another transmission from years ago. Her father had played it for her when she was young, a recording from the defense of New Geneva. Alien voices thanking human soldiers for their sacrifice, promising to remember their courage when the stars grew cold. Those promises had been forgotten when political convenience demanded it. Open a channel to the station, Elena ordered. The screen shifted to show the interior of the mining station's command center. A Takari family huddled around the communications console, their fur matted with fear sweat and their large eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. Elena recognized the look of beings who had given up hope. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Meridian's Hope, she said, her voice carrying all the authority she had earned through decades of keeping her crew alive in impossible situations. To the Takari miners of Kepler Station, I want you to know something. Humanity has not forgotten the kindness you showed our people at Earth Colony 7. We have not forgotten that you risked your ships to save our families when others turned away. She paused, making sure her words were being recorded on all frequencies. The galaxy may have forgotten human mercy, but they are about to learn what comes after someone threatens the innocent under our protection. Secure your stations and prepare for emergency maneuvers. Help is coming. Elena cut the transmission and turned to her crew. Young Chen was gripping his console so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Torres was running final calculations on her navigation computer. Even Martinez's background muttering from engineering had taken on a tone of grim anticipation. All stations prepare for combat, Elena announced. Remember, we're not trying to win a war. We're buying time for 3,000 people to live another day. The Meridian's Hope continued its approach toward the Zephyrian formation, a lone cargo hauler against 3 warships. To any outside observer, it looked like suicide. Elena Vasquez knew better. It looked like justice. The first shot came without warning. Captain Vector had apparently grown tired of waiting for Elena's response and ordered his gunners to disable the human ship's engines. The energy blast slammed into the Meridian's Hope's rear shielding, sending vibrations through the hull that Elena felt in her bones. Shields holding at 60%, Torres reported, her hands dancing across her console as she tried to compensate for the sudden power drain. They're using low-powered shots. They want us intact. Elena understood the tactic. The Zephyrians still believed they could salvage something valuable from this encounter, either her cargo or information about human refugee routes. They didn't know that the Meridian's Hope carried something far more dangerous than medical supplies. Chen, Open a channel to all 3 cruisers, Elena ordered. Let's give them a chance to reconsider. The main screen split into 3 sections showing the bridge crews of the Zephyrian vessels. Captain Vectar occupied the center position, flanked by his subordinates. All 3 wore the confident expressions of predators who had cornered easy prey. "Human captain," Vectar said with mock concern. "Your ship appears to have suffered damage. Perhaps you would like to surrender now and avoid further unpleasantness." Elena stepped into full view of the camera, making sure her next words would be recorded and transmitted across the galaxy through the Zephyrians' own communication networks. What happened next would either be remembered as a heroic last stand or a terrorist attack, depending on who controlled the narrative. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the human vessel Meridian's Hope. For the record, we responded to a distress call from civilian miners under attack by Zephyrian raiders conducting illegal extortion in neutral space. We offered to negotiate in good faith and were fired upon without provocation." She paused, letting that sink in for anyone who might review these recordings later. "To the families aboard Kepler Station, please prepare for emergency acceleration. To the crews of the Zephyrian vessels, this is your final warning. Withdraw from this system immediately or face the consequences." Vectar's laughter filled the bridge. His subordinate captains joined in, their translator rendering their amusement as a chorus of mechanical chuckling. "Consequences? You pilot a cargo hauler against 3 warships. What consequences could you possibly—" Elena cut the transmission and turned to her crew. "Martinez, initiate emergency acceleration on my mark. Torres, plot a collision course with the lead cruiser. Chen, target their sensor array with the mining laser." Her officers moved with the smooth efficiency of a crew that had faced impossible odds before. Elena watched the tactical display as the Zephyrian ships adjusted their formation, confident that they could handle whatever desperate move the humans attempted. They had never faced desperate humans before. "Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from the mining station," Chen reported. "The Takari are launching their escape pods. They're trying to evacuate as many families as possible." Elena nodded. The Takari were brave, but their escape pods wouldn't get far before the Zephyrian ships hunted them down. She needed to buy them more time, needed to do something that would force the raiders to focus entirely on her ship. "All hands, brace for acceleration," Elena announced ship-wide. "Martinez, execute gravity burst in 3, 2, 1. Mark!" The Meridian's Hope leaped forward like a racehorse released from the starting gate. The modified gravity coils screamed in protest as they bent space-time around the ship, creating a localized field that hurled them toward the enemy formation at impossible speed. The Zephyrians had perhaps 5 seconds to react before the human cargo hauler was among them, moving too fast for their targeting computers to track effectively. Elena felt her body press deep into her command chair, as the ship's inertial compensators struggled to keep her crew conscious. "Now, Chen." The mining laser speared out from the Meridian's Hope's forward array, designed to cut through asteroid rock but perfectly capable of slicing through the sensor dome of Vectar's cruiser. The Zephyrian ship immediately began veering off course as its navigation systems went haywire. "Torres, hard to starboard. Get us between the station and the second cruiser." The ship banked sharply, using the last of the gravity coil's energy to throw them into a defensive position. Elena watched as the second Zephyrian captain tried to get a clean shot at the mining station, only to find a human cargo hauler blocking his targeting solution. "They're firing on us," Torres called out as energy blasts hammered against their shields. "Shields down to 30%. Elena gripped her armrests as the ship shuddered under the assault. The Zephyrians were no longer playing games. They were using full military power, trying to punch through the Meridian's Hope's defenses and end this embarrassing resistance. "Cargo Bay 3, prepare for manual release," Elena ordered. "Chen, I need you to calculate a precise trajectory for those mining charges." The young navigator's face was pale with concentration as he worked out the physics of their desperate gambit. The mining charges weren't guided missiles, just explosive devices with proximity fuses. Getting them close enough to damage the enemy ships would require perfect timing and a lot of luck. "Captain, I've got a solution, but we'll need to get within 2 kilometers of the third cruiser. At that range, their defensive systems will tear us apart." Elena looked at the tactical display. The third Zephyrian ship had been hanging back, content to let its companions handle the human vessel. Its captain probably thought he was being clever, staying out of range while his allies did the dangerous work. He was about to learn that there was no safe distance from angry humans. Martinez, do we have any power left in the gravity coils? Maybe one more burst, Captain, but the containment field is already showing stress fractures. If we push them again, they might take half the ship with them when they blow. Elena considered their options. They had damaged one enemy ship and forced the second to focus on them instead of the mining station. The Takari evacuation was proceeding, but slowly. She needed to eliminate at least one more threat to give the civilians a real chance of escape. Torres, plot an intercept course for the third cruiser. Full conventional acceleration. Captain, that's suicide, Chen protested. Even if we survive the approach, we'll never get close enough to use the mining charges effectively. Elena stood up from her command chair and walked to the viewport. In the distance, she could see the tiny lights of escape pods fleeing from the mining station, each one carrying families who had done nothing wrong except try to make a living in the dangerous frontier of space. Chen, send a message to my sister on New Terra. Tell her I kept my promise to look after the people who couldn't look after themselves. She turned back to her crew, seeing the understanding in their eyes. They all knew what this next maneuver would cost them. Torres, when we reach optimal range, I want you to ram the third cruiser amidships. Aim for their engine section, Captain, Torres began. That's an order, Elena said firmly. We're not going to win this fight with weapons or tactics, but we can make sure the galaxy remembers what happens when someone threatens innocent people in front of humans. The Meridian's Hope began its final approach. A cargo hauler turned into a guided missile by the determination of its crew. Behind them, escape pods continued streaming away from the mining station, carrying 3,000 lives toward safety. In the distance, other ships had begun responding to the distress calls. Drawn by the spectacular battle unfolding in what should have been empty space, the galaxy was watching now, and they would witness something that had been absent from their collective memory for far too long. They would witness human mercy in action and learn what came after. The third Zephyrian cruiser, Wealth's Pursuit, opened fire with everything it had as the Meridian's Hope bore down on them like an avenging comet. Captain Elena Vasquez felt the ship bucking and twisting around her as Torres fought to keep them on course, while enemy fire systematically destroyed their defenses. Shields are gone, Chen shouted over the sound of exploding conduits and emergency alarms. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 5. Elena gripped her command chair as another impact nearly threw her to the floor. Through the smoke filling the bridge, she could see the Zephyrian cruiser growing larger in their view screen. The enemy captain was trying to bring his ship around to present a smaller target, but he had started the maneuver too late. Cargo Bay 3, release charges now, Elena ordered. The mining charges tumbled out of the Meridian's Hope's cargo bay like deadly seeds scattered on the wind. Each one was roughly the size of a person, and packed with enough explosive power to crack open an asteroid. As they drifted between the two ships, their proximity sensors began detecting the approaching Zephyrian cruiser. 15 seconds to impact, Torres announced, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Elena had never been more proud of her crew than in this moment, watching them perform their duties while their ship died around them. Captain, incoming transmission from the Wealth's Pursuit, Chen reported. Their captain wants to negotiate. Elena almost laughed. Now they wanted to talk. When a human cargo hauler was seconds away from ramming into their hull with enough force to cripple both vessels. Fear had a way of making even the most arrogant being suddenly reasonable. Put him through, Elena said. The Zephyrian captain's face appeared on what remained of their main screen. His blue skin had gone pale with terror, and his golden eyes were wide with the realization that the humans weren't bluffing about their willingness to die for strangers. Human captain, cease your attack immediately. We can reach an accommodation. The time for accommodation was before you fired on civilian miners, Elena replied. You made your choice when you decided that innocent lives were worth less than your profit margins. We are legitimate businessmen. This is an illegal attack on council-registered vessels. Elena felt the ship shudder as another impact tore through their port side. Emergency lighting bathed the bridge in red, and she could smell the acrid smoke of burning electronics. Chen, open a channel to all frequencies. I want every ship in this system to hear this. The young navigator's hands flew over his damaged console. Channel open, Captain. We're broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Elena looked directly into the camera, knowing that her words would be recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. History would judge what happened here. and she wanted to make sure the truth was preserved. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the human vessel, Meridian's Hope. We are about to sacrifice our ship and crew to protect 3,000 innocent civilians from Zephyrian raiders. Let the record show that we offered these criminals multiple opportunities to withdraw peacefully. Let it also show that when faced with a choice between profit and mercy, they chose profit. She paused, feeling the ship's acceleration pushing her deeper into her chair as they approached ramming speed. To the families fleeing on the escape pods, know that you are not forgotten. To the governments who cast humanity out of their councils and treaties, remember this moment when you decide whether our species deserves a place among the stars. The Zephyrian captain was screaming something about council law and diplomatic immunity, but Elena had already cut the transmission. She turned to her crew, seeing Chen gripping his console with white knuckles, Torres making final course corrections with the concentration of a master pilot, and Martinez's voice crackling over the intercom as he tried to keep their dying ship together for just a few more seconds. 10 seconds to impact, Torres announced. Elena closed her eyes and thought about her father, who had commanded this same ship during the evacuation of the Helix Nebula colonies. She thought about her grandfather, who had flown escort missions for refugee convoys. During the Titan Wars, she thought about all the humans who had chosen to stand between the darkness and those who could not protect themselves. 5 seconds. The mining charges reached their proximity triggers and detonated in a chain of brilliant explosions that lit up the space between the two ships. The Wealth's pursuit staggered as the blasts tore through her forward shields and damaged her primary weapons arrays. 3 seconds. Elena opened her eyes and saw the Zephyrian cruiser's hull rushing toward them, its blue-painted surface scarred by the explosion damage. She could see tiny figures moving behind viewports. Enemy crew members who probably had families waiting for them at home. 2 seconds. She hoped they would survive what came next. Second, the Meridian's Hope struck the Wealth's pursuit just forward of the engine section, her reinforced cargo bay designed for heavy loads crumpling against the cruiser's hull plating. The impact sent both ships spinning through space in a deadly embrace of twisted metal and venting atmosphere. Elena felt herself thrown forward against her restraints as the ship's artificial gravity failed. Emergency power flickered on and off, casting shifting shadows across the ruined bridge. Through the spider web of cracks in the main view screen, she could see that they had achieved their objective. The Zephyrian cruiser's engine section was dark, its propulsion systems completely destroyed. "Damage report," Elena called out, surprised to find that she was still alive and conscious. "We've lost main power. Life support is on emergency backup, and we're venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches," Torres reported. Her navigation console was sparking intermittently, but she was still at her post. "But we're alive, Captain. Somehow we're still alive." Elena looked at the tactical display, which was barely functioning on auxiliary power. The first Zephyrian cruiser was still dealing with its damaged sensors, flying blind while its crew tried to restore navigation. The second cruiser had broken off its attack on the mining station to assist its crippled companion. Most importantly, the stream of escape pods from Kepler Station continued uninterrupted. "Chen, can you raise the mining station?" The young navigator worked frantically at his damaged console. "I'm getting through, Captain. The Takari are reporting successful evacuation of all civilians. The last transport is launching now." Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. They had done it. Somehow, against impossible odds, they had saved 3,000 innocent lives. The cost had been her ship and possibly her crew, but the mathematics of mercy had never been about equal exchange. "Captain," Martinez's voice crackled over the intercom, "we've got maybe 30 minutes of life support left, and the hull is compromised in too many places to repair. We need immediate evacuation if we're going to survive this." Elena nodded, though she knew their escape pods had been damaged in the ramming attack. They had saved the Takari families, but their own chances of survival were slim. Still, she felt a strange sense of peace. They had done the right thing, regardless of the consequences. "Incoming transmission," Chen announced suddenly. "Multiple ships approaching from the edge of the system." Elena felt her heart sink. If more Zephyrian vessels were arriving, the rescued civilians would be hunted down and killed anyway. All their sacrifice would be meaningless. But as the sensor readings cleared, she saw something that made her smile for the first time since the battle began. The approaching ships weren't Zephyrian. They carried the markings of independent traders, Takari commercial vessels, and even a few human freighters that she recognized from the refugee networks. The galaxy had been watching, and some of them had remembered what it meant to stand with those who fought for the innocent. The rescue fleet arrived like a constellation of hope against the star-scattered darkness. Elena watched through her cracked viewscreen as 7 ships of various species and configurations moved into formation around the battle site. The lead vessel was a Takari heavy transport, its hull painted with the flowing script that marked it as belonging to the Kepler Mining Consortium. "Captain Vasquez," came a voice over the emergency frequency, translated through universal communication protocols. "This is Captain Thekri of the Transport Remembrance of Kindness. We are here to assist in evacuation procedures and provide medical aid to your crew." Elena felt tears she didn't know she was holding back begin to flow down her soot-stained cheeks. The name of the Takari ship wasn't a coincidence. In their culture, vessel names carried deep significance, often commemorating important events or honoring debts that could never be fully repaid. "Chen, respond to Captain Thekri. Tell him we have wounded crew members and our ship is beyond salvage." As her navigator worked to establish stable communication with the rescue fleet, Elena took a moment to process what was happening around them. The 2 remaining functional Zephyrian cruisers had withdrawn to a safe distance, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Their simple piracy operation had turned into a diplomatic nightmare, with multiple species now involved and undoubtedly recording everything for later transmission to their respective governments. "Captain," Torres reported from her damaged station, "I'm reading life signs aboard the Wealth's Pursuit. Looks like most of their crew survived the collision." Elena nodded. Despite everything, she was glad the Zephyrians had survived. Dead pirates became martyrs, but living ones could face justice through proper legal channels. More importantly, their survival meant that no one could claim the humans had committed an act of unprovoked murder. "Incoming message from the Zephyrian cruiser Prophet's Edge," Chen announced. "Captain Vector wants to speak with you directly." Elena considered refusing the communication, but she realized that whatever Vector said now would be heard by the entire rescue fleet. Let the galaxy hear how the Zephyrians justified their actions when faced with the consequences. "Put him through." Vector's image appeared on her screen, his angular features twisted with rage and humiliation. Behind him, Elena could see his bridge crew working frantically to restore their sensor array and regain some tactical advantage. "Human," Vector spat. "You have committed an act of piracy against lawful council vessels. This incident will be reported to the proper authorities, and your species will face sanctions for this unprovoked aggression." Elena leaned back in her damaged command chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling into her bones. She had heard this same speech countless times over the years. The reflexive accusation that always followed when humans dared to interfere with the established order. "Captain Vector," she replied calmly, "you attacked a civilian mining station, threatened to murder 3,000 innocent beings, and fired upon a humanitarian vessel attempting to negotiate for their safety. Every word of our interaction has been recorded and transmitted to multiple independent witnesses." She gestured toward the rescue fleet surrounding them. "I see Takari vessels, Andromedan traders, human freighters, and at least 2 Silurian diplomatic ships among our rescuers. Do you really want to explain to their governments why you consider the protection of innocent civilians to be an act of piracy?" Vector's golden eyes narrowed as he realized the political trap he had walked into. The Zephyrians operated successfully because they kept their activities in the gray areas of galactic law, targeting isolated settlements where witnesses were few and official oversight was minimal. But this rescue operation had drawn attention from across the local sector, making it impossible to simply sweep the incident under the bureaucratic carpet. "The miners owed legitimate debts," Vector began. "To whom?" Elena interrupted. "Show us the contracts. Provide documentation of the services rendered. Explain why debt collection requires threatening to destroy life support systems." The Zephyrian captain's face flushed a deeper shade of blue, and Elena knew he couldn't produce any of the documentation she was requesting. His operation had been simple extortion, relying on the victim's isolation and fear to prevent them from seeking outside help. "This conversation is being recorded and transmitted to the Galactic Council's Investigation Division," announced a new voice on the communication channel. Elena looked at her sensor readings and saw that one of the Silurian ships had taken a position where it could monitor all transmissions. The Silurians were known for their scrupulous adherence to legal procedures, making them ideal witnesses for this kind of incident. Captain Vektar realized that his situation had become untenable. With multiple species watching and recording, he couldn't simply eliminate the witnesses and claim self-defense. His best option now was to withdraw and hope that Zephyrian political influence could minimize the consequences of this public embarrassment. "This matter is far from over," Vektar declared, but Elena could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "The council will hear about this incident." Elena smiled despite the pain from her injuries and the knowledge that her ship was dying around her. "I'm counting on it, Captain. The galaxy needs to remember what happens when innocent people are threatened in the presence of humans." The transmission ended, and Elena watched as the two functional Zephyrian cruisers began moving away from the battle site. They would likely return later to retrieve their damaged companion, but for now, they were admitting defeat. "Captain Vasquez," came Captain Thekri's voice again, "we are preparing to take your crew aboard our vessel. Our medical facilities are standing by to treat any injuries." Elena looked around her ruined bridge at the crew members who had trusted her enough to follow her into what should have been certain death. Chen was bleeding from a head wound but still working to maintain communications. Torres had burns on her arms from her exploding console, but continued monitoring their position. Even Martinez's voice continued to crackle over the intercom as he worked to keep their failing life support systems operational for just a little longer. "Torres, can you get us close enough to the Takari ship for crew transfer? Maneuvering thrusters are still responding, Captain. I can get us alongside their docking bay." As the Meridian's Hope slowly moved toward the rescue vessel, Elena reflected on what they had accomplished. 3,000 civilians were safe, sailing away from this system in their escape pods toward refugee centers where they could rebuild their lives. The Zephyrian raiders had been exposed and humiliated in front of multiple governments. Most importantly, the galaxy had been reminded that there were still those willing to stand between the darkness and the innocent. "Captain," Chen said quietly, "we're receiving messages from human settlements across 3 sectors. Word is spreading about what happened here." Elena nodded, understanding the implications. The refugee networks that connected scattered human communities would carry this story to every corner of the galaxy where her species had found refuge. For the first time in decades, they would have something to be proud of. Proof that their ancestors' values had not been forgotten among the stars. "What kind of messages?" she asked. Chen's young face broke into a grin despite his injuries. "Offers of assistance, Captain. Ships volunteering to escort refugee convoys. Stations offering sanctuary to displaced families. Even some planetary governments quietly suggesting they might be willing to reconsider their policies toward human refugees." Elena felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the ship's failing environmental systems. Perhaps this incident would mark the beginning of something larger, a reminder to the galaxy that mercy and justice were not outdated concepts, but necessary foundations for any civilization that hoped to survive among the stars. As the Meridian's Hope docked with the Takari rescue ship, Elena took one last look around the bridge that had been her home for so many years. Her father would have been proud, she thought. They had kept faith with the promise that humans would always stand with those who had no one else to defend them. The galaxy had indeed forgotten human mercy. But after today, they would remember what came after that mistake. 3 weeks after the Battle of Kepler Station, as the galactic media had begun calling it, Elena Vasquez found herself standing in the most unlikely place she could have imagined. The observation deck of the Galactic Council's primary station, orbiting the diplomatic world of Concordia Prime. The view was spectacular, showing the blue-green planet below surrounded by the lights of thousands of ships from hundreds of different species. Once humanity had been part of this grand coalition of civilizations. Once human diplomats had walked these corridors and argued for justice in the great chambers below. That had been before the Treaty of Forgotten Worlds, before humanity had been quietly erased from most official records and relegated to the status of minor refugees operating on the fringes of civilized space. "Captain Vasquez," came a familiar voice behind her. Elena turned to see Ambassador Thekri approaching, his Takari features softer than the typical military bearing she had grown accustomed to during their rescue operation. He wore the flowing robes of a diplomatic representative, marking him as one of the few Takari allowed to speak for their entire species in council sessions. "Ambassador," Elena replied, still adjusting to being addressed with respect by an official representative of a council member species. "I have to admit, when your people invited me here, I never expected to actually see the inside of the council chambers." Thekri's fur rippled in what Elena had learned was the Takari equivalent of a bitter smile. Circumstances have a way of forcing even the most reluctant institutions to confront uncomfortable truths. Your actions at Kepler Station have created what our diplomats call an unavoidable political reality. Elena looked back out at the ships surrounding the station. She could identify dozens of different species by their vessel configurations, from the elegant curves of Andromedan explorers to the utilitarian bulk of Terran mining haulers. Each one represented a different world, a different culture, a different perspective on how the galaxy should be governed. "What kind of political reality?" she asked. "The kind where 3,000 rescued civilians are telling their story to every media outlet in 7 sectors, Thekri replied. "The kind where the Zephyrian merchant marine is facing fraud investigations from 5 different planetary governments. The kind where human refugee ships are being escorted by volunteer fleets instead of being turned away at border checkpoints." Elena felt a cautious optimism stirring in her chest. During the 3 weeks of medical treatment and debriefing sessions, she had been carefully isolated from outside communication. Her hosts had been kind but vague about the larger implications of what had happened at Kepler Station. "Are you saying the Council is actually going to acknowledge what happened?" Thekri gestured toward the central complex visible through the observation deck's transparent aluminum windows. "In 2 hours, the full Council Assembly will convene to hear formal testimony about the incident. You, Captain Vasquez, have been invited to address the assembled representatives of 47 galactic civilizations." Elena felt her knees weaken slightly. She had commanded refugee ships through dangerous space, faced down pirates and corporate raiders, and sacrificed her vessel to save innocent lives. But the thought of standing before the Galactic Council, speaking for her entire species after decades of enforced silence, was terrifying in a completely different way. "What am I supposed to say to them?" she asked. "The truth," Thekri replied simply. "Tell them what you told me during our rescue operation. Tell them why a human cargo captain was willing to die for Takari miners she had never met. Tell them what your species offers to the galaxy that has been missing for the past 50 years. Elena turned away from the view and looked at the Takari ambassador. His large eyes held an expression she had learned to recognize during their time together. The look of someone who had made a difficult decision and was prepared to live with the consequences. "You're taking a risk by supporting this," she observed. "The Takari people have never forgotten the evacuation of Earth Colony 7, Thekri said quietly. 43 human ships responded to our distress call when solar flares threatened to sterilize our evacuation transports. Your captains risked their vessels and their crews to save families they had never met, asking for nothing in return." He paused, his fur darkening with what Elena recognized as shame. "When the Council voted to exclude humanity from the Treaty of Forgotten Worlds, the Takari delegation abstained rather than voting against our own political interests. We told ourselves that it was a temporary measure, that we would find a way to restore human membership once the political climate improved." Elena understood the weight of that confession. In council politics, abstaining on a vote affecting another species was considered a form of diplomatic cowardice, a way to avoid taking a moral stand that might have economic consequences. "And now?" she asked. "Now we have seen what happens when the galaxy forgets human mercy," Thekri replied. "Pirates operate freely in regions where human patrol ships once maintained order. Refugee crises escalate into humanitarian disasters because no one is willing to risk their own resources for strangers in need. The Zephyrian incident was just the most visible example of a larger problem." Elena walked over to one of the data terminals that lined the observation deck, accessing the public information networks that connected the council station to the rest of the galaxy. The headlines that scrolled across the screen told a story she was only beginning to understand. "Human captain sacrifices ship to save miners." Ran alongside Zephyrian protection racket exposed by independent investigation. Further down, she saw volunteer fleets escort refugee convoys and Takari ambassador calls for human readmission to council. But it was the smaller stories that caught her attention. the ones buried in the local news feeds from frontier worlds and border systems. Human medical team arrives at plague-stricken colony. Earthship repairs station life support without payment. Terran volunteers distribute food to war refugees. We're not the only ones, Elena murmured, reading story after story of humans who had chosen to help rather than look away when they encountered suffering. No, Tekri agreed, moving to stand beside her at the terminal. Your species has been quietly doing what it has always done, even after being cast out of official recognition. The difference is that now the galaxy is paying attention. Elena scrolled through more headlines, seeing a pattern that filled her with both pride and concern. Human ships were operating across the galaxy, carrying supplies to disaster areas, evacuating civilians from war zones, and providing medical aid to settlements that couldn't afford professional services. How many ships are we talking about? She asked. Current estimates suggest nearly 2,000 human vessels are engaged in humanitarian operations across 7 sectors, Tekri replied. Most of them are converted cargo haulers like your Meridian's Hope, operated by families or small communities rather than any central authority. Elena felt a chill as she realized the implications. 2,000 ships meant perhaps 100,000 humans, who had chosen to risk their lives for strangers rather than settle safely on some remote world and try to rebuild their civilization in isolation. The council is going to be terrified, she said softly. They'll see an organized humanitarian fleet as a potential military force. Tekri's fur rippled again, this time with what might have been approval. An astute observation, Captain. Which is why your testimony today is so crucial. You have the opportunity to explain to 47 species why humans do what you do, and what it means for the future of galactic civilization. Elena looked out at the ships surrounding the station one more time, seeing them now with different eyes. Each vessel represented not just a species or a government, but a choice about what kind of galaxy they wanted to live in. A galaxy where the strong protected the weak, or one where survival belonged only to those with sufficient military or economic power. What if they vote to classify humanitarian operations as a security threat? She asked. Then the Takari delegation will vote against that classification, Tekri replied firmly, as will several other species whose citizens have been rescued by human ships over the past 50 years. The political landscape has changed, Captain Vasquez. The question is whether the Council will adapt to that change, or find itself increasingly irrelevant. Elena straightened her borrowed diplomatic attire and checked her reflection in the observation deck's polished metal surfaces. She looked like what she was, a refugee ship captain who had spent decades operating in the dangerous spaces between official recognition and outright exile. In 2 hours, she would stand before the most powerful political assembly in the galaxy and speak for a species that had been systematically erased from their records. She would have to explain why humans chose mercy over safety, why they risked their lives for strangers, and why the galaxy needed that perspective if it hoped to remain a place worth living in. She thought about her crew, currently recovering in the station's medical facilities, and about the 3,000 Takari families who were building new lives in refugee settlements across the sector. She thought about her father and grandfather, who had made similar choices in their own times and faced similar consequences. The galaxy had forgotten human mercy, but they were about to be reminded what came after making that mistake, and perhaps if she could find the right words, they might remember why mercy mattered in the first place. The Great Assembly Chamber of the Galactic Council was a marvel of architectural diplomacy, designed to accommodate the physical and cultural needs of dozens of different species. Elena Vasquez stood at the speaker's podium, looking up at the tiered galleries that rose above her like an amphitheater carved from starlight and hope. 47 different delegations occupied those galleries, each representing millions or billions of beings whose lives would be affected by whatever decision emerged from today's session. She could see the reptilian Silurians with their meticulous recording equipment, the ethereal Andromedans floating in their atmospheric containers, the massive hegemony representatives whose single delegate required an entire section to accommodate their bulk. And there, in a gallery that had been empty for 50 years, sat the Takari delegation with an empty chair beside them, marked with a simple placard. Terran Federation, Observer Status. Elena had been given 30 minutes to address the assembly. 30 minutes to speak for a species that had been erased from official recognition, to explain why humans did what they did, and to argue for their place among the stars. She looked down at her notes, then set them aside. The words she needed wouldn't be found in careful diplomatic language or prepared speeches. They would come from the same place that had driven her to risk everything for 3,000 strangers at Kepler Station. Honored representatives, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. My name is Elena Vasquez. I am the captain of a human refugee ship, the daughter of a refugee ship captain, and the granddaughter of a woman who flew evacuation missions during the Titan Wars. For 3 generations, my family has carried supplies and hope to people who had nowhere else to turn. She paused, looking up at the assembled delegates. Some were paying close attention, while others seemed to be treating this as a minor procedural matter. She needed to make them understand that what happened here today would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. 3 weeks ago, my ship responded to a distress call from Kepler Mining Station. We found 3,000 Takari civilians under attack by Zephyrian raiders, who demanded payment for protection services that had never been requested or provided. When I chose to intervene, I was asked a question that I think defines the central issue before this assembly today. Elena activated the chamber's holographic display system, showing the recorded communication from Captain Vectar during the battle. The Zephyrian captain asked me what consequences a single cargo hauler could possibly impose on 3 warships. He saw my intervention as illogical, economically inefficient, and ultimately pointless. From his perspective, 3,000 civilian lives were simply an acceptable loss in pursuit of profit. The recording played across the chamber, showing the moment when the Meridian's hope had emerged from the asteroid field to face impossible odds. Helena watched the delegates' reactions, seeing surprise, concern, and in some cases recognition. I want to be clear about something, Elena continued. My ship was not a warship. My crew were not soldiers. We carried medical supplies intended for frontier colonies, not weapons intended for battle. When we chose to engage those raiders, we knew the most likely outcome was our own destruction. She activated another display, showing the tactical analysis of the battle that the Council's investigators had prepared. The mathematics were stark. A civilian cargo hauler against 3 military cruisers should have resulted in complete destruction of the human vessel within minutes. So why did we do it? Why did 37 humans choose to risk everything for 3,000 strangers we had never met and would never see again? Elena looked directly at the Zephyrian delegation, noting their uncomfortable silence. The answer to that question reveals something that I believe this galaxy has lost and desperately needs to rediscover. We intervened because those 3,000 people had no one else. We intervened because mercy is not a transaction that requires equal exchange. We intervened because the alternative was to live in a universe where suffering is acceptable as long as it happens to someone else. A murmur ran through the assembly as delegates began to understand the implications of what she was saying. Elena pressed on, knowing she had their attention now. For 50 years, humanity has been systematically excluded from galactic governance. We were too aggressive, you said. Too willing to use force to solve diplomatic problems. Too quick to interfere in situations that didn't concern us directly. The Treaty of Forgotten Worlds was supposed to bring stability to frontier regions by removing the destabilizing influence of human intervention. Elena activated a third display, showing statistical data that made several delegates lean forward in their seats. This is a map of piracy incidents, humanitarian disasters, and civilian casualties in regions where human patrol ships once operated. The red zones indicate areas where attacks on civilians have increased by over 300% since the treaty went into effect. The yellow zones show regions where refugee crises have escalated into full-scale humanitarian disasters because no one was willing to risk their own resources to provide assistance. The map painted a stark picture of suffering that had been allowed to flourish in humanity's absence. Elena could see delegates from affected regions nodding grimly as they recognized their own worlds among the red and yellow zones. The Kepler Station incident was not an isolated event, Elena said. It was simply the most visible example of what happens when mercy becomes a luxury that civilized species can't afford to practice. She deactivated the displays and stepped closer to the assembly, making her next words as personal as possible. I have spent my entire adult life carrying refugees between worlds. delivering medical supplies to plague-stricken colonies, and evacuating civilians from war zones. I have done this work without council authorization, without official recognition, and without any expectation of reward beyond the knowledge that people who would have died instead lived to see another day. Elena gestured toward the galleries above her. Every species represented in this chamber has benefited from human intervention at some point during the past 50 years. Andromedan exploration ships rescued from spatial anomalies. Silurian research stations supplied during equipment failures. Hegemony colonies evacuated ahead of asteroid impacts. We have records of over 12,000 separate incidents where human ships provided assistance to non-human beings in distress. She let that number sink in before continuing. And yet, when Captain Vekitar wanted to justify his attack on civilian miners, he knew he could do so with impunity because humans had been written out of galactic law. We exist in the spaces between your treaties and protocols, helping people who fall through the cracks of official recognition. Elena pulled up one final display, showing the current locations of human humanitarian vessels across the galaxy. Right now, as we speak, nearly 2,000 human ships are engaged in mercy missions across 7 sectors. We are not an invasion fleet or a military threat. We are 2,000 examples of what happens when a species chooses to measure its success by how many lives it saves rather than how much profit it generates. She turned to face the Zephyrian delegation directly. Captain, Vektar asked what consequences I could impose on his warships. I want the representatives of the Zephyrian Merchant Marine to consider this question. What consequences will you face when the galaxy remembers that there are still those willing to stand between the darkness and the innocent? The Zephyrian delegates shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that their government was already dealing with investigations, boycotts, and diplomatic sanctions resulting from the Kepler incident. Elena returned her attention to the full assembly. The choice before this council is not whether to readmit humanity to galactic governance. We will continue our work regardless of your decision, because it is who we are at our core. The choice is whether you want to be part of a galaxy where mercy is valued and protected, or one where it is merely tolerated when convenient. She paused, gathering her thoughts for her closing argument. 50 years ago, you decided that human mercy was too dangerous to be trusted with official authority. I submit to you that the true danger lies in a civilization that has forgotten the value of those willing to sacrifice for strangers. The true threat to galactic stability is not the species that chooses to intervene when innocents are threatened, but the one that chooses to look away. Elena stepped back from the podium, her formal testimony complete. The chamber fell silent as delegates considered her words and their implications. Finally, the Takari ambassador rose from his seat. The delegation from the Takari Republic moves to restore full council membership to the Terran Federation, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. Seconded by the Andromedan Collective, came another voice. Seconded by the Silurian Technocracy. Seconded by the Outer Rim Alliance. One by one, delegations rose to support the motion, until even some of the species that had voted for humanity's exclusion were standing in acknowledgement of what Elena had said. The final vote was 39 in favor, 6 abstentions, and Onsu,